You did everything right. You studied. You showed up. You took the unpaid internship and called it an opportunity. You built the resume, learned the skills, networked to rooms, and did every single thing the adults in your life told you would work. And then somewhere around 30, maybe 35, you looked up from all of it and realized you're exhausted in a way that has nothing to do with sleep. Not physically drained, something deeper. A tiredness that lives in the part of you that used to believe effort was enough, that used to believe the story. That feeling isn't weakness, it's information, and it traces back to exactly when and where you were formed. You were born into a promise. The 90s had a particular kind of optimism, bright, loud, genuinely believed. Your parents handed it to you like an inheritance. Study hard, get the grades, go to college, get the degree, get the job, build the life. The formula was real to them because it had worked for them. They weren't lying. They just didn't know it was already coming apart at the edges. What nobody told you was that you were the last generation asked to follow instructions written for a world that no longer existed. The internet didn't ease into your childhood. It exploded through it. Oregon Trail in a computer lab became AOL on a desktop, became broadband, became a smartphone in your pocket. All inside 15 years. You were the first generation of children asked to grow up inside acceleration, and nobody had a manual for what that did to a developing mind. Then the towers fell. You were somewhere between 10 and 20, old enough to understand the images, young enough that the fear rewired something foundational. The world was not the place you'd been told it was. That knowledge arrived before your brain was finished forming. It settled into your nervous system like a permanent weather pattern. And then, 2008. You graduated into a collapsed economy, carrying debt you'd taken on in good faith because that was the formula. That was what responsible people did. Jobs weren't there. Internships replaced salaries. The gig economy was marketed as freedom, but what it actually delivered was precarity with a better logo. You were raised to believe you were special. Then you were handed a clipboard and told to wait. That gap between the promise and the reality didn't just disappoint you, it shaped you. Several specific ways, actually. The first is the performance trap. It started early. Gold stars, honor roll, GPA, SAT scores, class rank. You were evaluated constantly and visibly from the time you were small, and you absorbed the lesson underneath the grades. That love and approval were responses to output. That being enough was something you had to keep earning. The metrics never stopped. They just changed addresses. Report cards became performance reviews. Class rank became follower count. Gold stars became likes. The scoreboard followed you into adulthood because you'd internalized it so completely. You carry it inside now. Today it looks like Sunday evening anxiety that arrives before the week even starts. Checking your phone at midnight, not because anything urgent is happening, but because stopping feels somehow dangerous. The inability to sit still without a creeping sense that you should be doing something. You've been performing since childhood, and you are tired in a place that rest doesn't reach. The second is optimism fatigue. They meant it when they told you the world was yours. That's what makes it complicated. The adults who raised you genuinely believed it, and so the disappointment when reality arrived didn't feel like a systemic failure. It felt personal, like you had missed something everyone else found. So you kept the hope alive with one hand and braced for impact with the other. You learned to want things from a slight distance, to dream with a quiet asterisk attached, because hoping fully and being wrong hurts more than hedging. Today this looks like starting things and not finishing them, not from laziness, but from a self-protective relationship with completion. Finishing means being judged. Being judged means potentially failing. Failing means confirming a fear you've carried since the first time a report card told you exactly where you stood. You're not cynical. You're armored. There's a difference. The third is chronic ambient anxiety. After September 11th, the news never really turned off again. It became a permanent presence. And then social media arrived and handed every tragedy, every outrage, every breaking development directly to your nervous system 24 hours a day. Your brain processed each notification the same way it would process a threat in the physical world, a low-level alarm, repeated thousands of times daily, over years. The adaptation was hypervigilance, a constant low-grade readiness, always slightly braced, always scanning. Today it feels like your baseline personality, a background hum of unease you've accepted as just who you are. It isn't. It's a nervous system that was trained to expect disruption and never received the signal that it was safe to stand down. You are not naturally anxious. You were made anxious by a world that never stopped demanding alertness. The fourth is the comparison wound. Before social media, comparison had a geographic limit. You knew what your neighbors had. You saw how your classmates lived. The scope was human-sized. Then the feed arrived and removed every limit. Suddenly, you were measuring yourself against a curated highlight reel of millions of people, every single day in real time. Your nervous system, already wired for threat detection, turned that feed into a continuous audit of whether you were enough. Today it shows up as closing an app, feeling worse than when you opened it without being able to explain why. As a voice that appears uninvited when someone else's vacation photos load. As a tiredness that comes not from what you're doing, but from constantly measuring the distance between your life and the projected lives of everyone else. No generation before you had to navigate this. You're not shallow. You're responding to a genuinely unprecedented psychological input. The fifth is tender toughness. You are the most emotionally literate generation in American history. You know the vocabulary, attachment styles, nervous system regulation, generational trauma, burnout. You've been to therapy, or thought seriously about it, or spent years learning the language of your own inner life. And you are still exhausted. Because you were given emotional intelligence inside a world that still punished you for using it. You learned to name your feelings in systems that rewarded you for suppressing them. And so the adaptation was to turn all that awareness outward. Fierce empathy for others, relentless advocacy for everyone in your orbit, while quietly, privately, being the last person you extended the same grace to. You hold other people's pain with both hands and manage your own with one eye closed. Here is what the generations around you look like from the outside. Gen X watched institutions fail and had already stopped expecting much. Their detachment was a kind of protection. Gen Z inherited your wreckage, never had the illusion to begin with, and built their identity around the absence of certainty rather than the collapse of it. You believed. That's the thing nobody fully accounts for. You were earnest in an era that punished earnestness, and you wore the consequences of that for years while being told the problem was your attitude.
It wasn't your attitude.
It was the collision between genuine belief and structural failure, between who you were raised to be and what the world was actually prepared to offer. The burnout is not a flaw. The anxiety is not a personality defect. The exhaustion, the indecision, the inability to rest, these are not things wrong with you. They are logical outcomes of growing up in a specific moment that asked more than it gave back. Carl Jung said the most important question a person can ask is, what myth am I living? Yours was meritocracy, the formula, the idea that the right inputs produce the right life. You lived it honestly, you did what it asked, and now you're old enough to see it for what it was. That's not the end of something, that's the beginning. Underneath all of it, the performance, the comparison, the armor, the running, there is still the kid who believed the world was going to be fair, the one who wanted to do something that actually mattered. That kid is still there. They just got very quiet. If something here put language to something you've been carrying, leave it below. You'll find you're not the only one who's been holding it.